Hey everybody, it's been a while since I've made a video and it's just been very busy for me. I clearly have been busy at work. I have a new proper cabinet saw and table and still have my old table behind me that's going to be retired soon. But I've been just been busy on a lot of projects, and for this video I am going to be making a coffee table, but not just any coffee table. This is going to be a coffee table for a Firehouse. The top is going to have their logo in epoxy, and the legs, oh, this stuff's way heavier than it looks. They gave me a retired fire hose. I'm obviously going to be cutting off the ends of this, but I'm actually going to be using this old fire hose to make the table legs. I'm not entirely sure how easy this stuff is going to be to cut cleanly, but it's going to be an experiment, and I guess you're all going to just come along for it. So stay tuned and keep watching.
The first thing that I did was cut off the ends of the pipe, which are the aluminum couplers, just with a Sawzall as clean as I could, and then it was more manageable to work with.
Okay, I did a little bit of experimenting and I came up with a good solution. So I have just a small little tabletop bandsaw, but it works. So I filled the inside with just some, it's actually scrap 2x4s, glued them together, and then just used my lathe and made an approximate size that I thought would work. And then what I did, if you can see the end of this, I used Gorilla Glue, wood glue, the original. This stuff expands 3 to 4 times, it says. So I have to come up with a better way to actually get it fully coated on the inside, like as I'm putting the wood plug in. But it actually expanded enough to keep this nice and rigid and tight.
Okay, so I'm going to show you how I'm making these legs for the table. I have 2 of them glued up here, and I'm going to make the other 2 now. So first what I did was I cut the fire hose into a workable section, and this is the outer sleeve. This jacket was actually over top of this. So what I did was I first cut it and then removed the outer jacket. I don't need that. And now I have just the inner jacket with the rubber on it. I just have scrap 2x4s. I'm gonna now prepare this to be a workable size to fit onto this jig that I have here for making dowels or legs. And once I get that on, then I'll glue it up. After the initial glue up, I then ripped it and planed it to be slightly oversized from the diameter that I wanted. All right, now that I rough cut these posts, I just 45 the corners off, so I'm not taking a lot of material off when I round it over. Found center, drilled a pilot hole that is then going to hold it in place on both ends. I have a bolt that's ground down to a point on both ends, and then on this side I have a T-nut. I'm smacking that T-nut into the end of the post to lock it in, and then once I have that locked in place, I'm then adjusting my fence location to decrease the diameter of this and checking it with a caliper. Got that leg done. As you can see, it makes a very nice smooth finish. You just have to control your RPMs with the drill. Don't want to go too fast and don't want to go too slow, just a nice RPM range. I also waxed it because just from my test piece that I did, it's way easier to slide it into this rubber hose while gluing it if I just have a little wax coating on it. I'm not concerned about the wax not letting the glue adhere to the wood properly, because that's really not the intended purpose. The intended purpose is to let the wood glue that I got, which is Gorilla Glue, to expand around this and hold the pipe or hose to this. I'm not trying to like permanently bond it to the wood. I'm basically just using it as a filler that's going to expand and hold that on nice and tight and rigid. And when you feel it, it feels rigid. You don't feel like hollow spots underneath. So that's why I'm doing that. Also, shout out to RZ Mask for sending me this awesome mask. They're not sponsoring my channel, but this dust mask is awesome. All right, let's get the last one done. Okay, now that I have all of these rounded over, I'm finishing up the last two here. As you can see, I'm sliding in about a foot at a time and just squeezing a bunch of that expanding wood glue in and just pushing and twisting in the same motion to get it to slide all the way in. Oh, it's not as easy as it looks, but it goes in. Whew, it's a workout. So this is dry, and after it's done drying, you'll see just how much this expands. So if I push on it, it's a little bit squishy because there's a small void. With this dry one, there's no voids at all. I mean, there's a little tiny void right there, but for the most part, it's solid. There's no voids. Might be a small hollow spot here and there, but it worked out really well. So that's 3 of 4. Catch my breath, do the last one. After I finished gluing up all 4 of those sections, I then proceeded to start cutting all of the various angles for all of my glue ups. I'm not going to bother showing you every single glue joint that I'm putting together, but essentially this is 1/2 of the bottom, and I'm just using a biscuit joiner to just help align it. Other than that, I'm not really adding any reinforcement because these joints aren't going to be under any stress. All of the points on the legs are actually going to be screwed or glued to the tabletop, so nothing can really move. All right, on to the fun part. Now I get to play with my new tool. So I just finished gluing up the last bit of the legs, and I laid out some shaper tape on this. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because I'm doing 6 different colors of epoxy, and I'm doing one color at a time, and then I'm going to sand it flat, add the other color. So it's going to be a process. Now this kind of thing would be easier on a traditional tabletop CNC, but I work in a small shop and I don't have the space. So that's why I decided to get with this, since this takes up as much space as a router. I'm going to do my first color, which is going to be my 2 numbers in the middle, which are then going to be laid in. They gave me this faux diamond plate. I'm also going to cut this to that shape. I'm also going to cut this to the same template shape of the numbers, and then these are going to be inset into the bottom of this and then covered over with a 1/2 inch of clear epoxy. So it's going to look really cool. You're going to see this, which is going to look like regular old diamond plate, inside the table, and the rest of it it's going to be various colors. So that's what I'm starting with. First thing I'm going to do is get this set up on here and start a new scan. For those of you that aren't familiar with what the Shaper Origin is, it is a handheld CNC router. So what I'm doing right now is setting up what's called a workspace. You put the shaper tape down and create a grid, which you can then lay on your designs and patterns. So first thing I did was do that, and then I'm starting with the 2 numbers in the middle, which are going to be the clear epoxy with the diamond plate embedded in it. And then after that pour has been done, I can go back with the shaper and do my second pass to do a colored epoxy. Here I'm doing the yellow, and then once this is poured, I'm going to do the insides on those 4 sides are going to be blue. Now, I did it this way just because I wanted to keep those edges nice and clean on the outside. I later actually re-poured the yellow because I wasn't happy with the color. I didn't add enough pigment. So later on in the video, you might notice that the yellow is a different shade. That's just because I re-poured that section. After I did the 4 quadrants with the blue, I then actually went back with the shaper once again and routed out the epoxy itself to do all of the smaller inlay details on those 4 sides. I did all the different colors and I've let this sit in the corner of my shop for a few days. It says a recommended 7 days for this epoxy to fully harden. So I let it sit for about a week and now I'm gonna sand it down. And you'll see some of these smaller pores where the fine details are. It looks kind of blobby, but the detail will be there when I sand it down. Now, I'm gonna have to be pretty aggressive with this because of how many different colors and pores I did. They're all different heights. And for the majority of everything, I poured it at a 1/4 inch depth, except for the smaller details, which are about an 1/8 inch at depth. But the smaller details are kind of in the lower crevices of everything. So I'm not concerned about sanding too much off and not leaving any material. So I'm gonna hit it first with a belt sander, which I know sounds pretty aggressive, but once I get it pretty much relatively flat with the belt sander, I'm then gonna progressively sand it with finer and finer and finer sandpaper with my orbital until it is a nice polished finish. I did an initial pass with my belt sander starting with 80. I then got to a point that I was happy with it, changed out the belt, and then did a pass with 120 grit. After this step was done, then I started to go with finer paper with my orbital. I'm done with the belt sander, and you can see, now you can actually see all these fine details are no longer blobby. It is perfectly flat. I did a quick once over. I don't see any issues, no pits or any little bubbles that appeared. It's nice and flat. Now that I'm confident I don't have any major issues, I'm going to rough trim it with my jigsaw to get rid of the excess around the outside. I was waiting till the very last minute to do that in case I needed to realign my template with the shaper. But I don't need to do that. I'm gonna rough cut it, hit it with the flush trim bit, get it into a nice finished shape, and then after that, progressively going with finer and finer sandpaper until it is a nice smear finish. It was finally time for me to cut out the circle, so I did a rough pass with my jigsaw. After I cut that, I then went back with a flush trim bit and cleaned up that edge. And after I cleaned up the edges, I then just went over the whole thing with a final pass of fine grit sandpaper to clean it up. Okay, I have pretty much finished sanding this. I have actually opted to not polish it. I'm actually going to put a crystal clear high gloss lacquer on top of this for a little extra protection, since this is going to be a coffee table. It's also a little more difficult to polish since it's epoxy and wood. It's not just epoxy. If I did a thin skim coat of tabletop epoxy over the whole thing, I would definitely polish it. But since I'm trying to leave it with a more natural color in the wood, I opted to not do a full tabletop epoxy pour. I'm actually going to leave it where it's at. I sanded down to 320 grit. I'm going to very thoroughly clean this off, wipe it down. I'm going to use a little bit of denatured alcohol to get any little fine dust out of this thing as I can. Make sure it's 100% clean, and then I'm going to set it up over there on some sawhorses and spray it with a few coats of high gloss lacquer. And that's really going to make this thing pop. After doing about 4 coats of lacquer, I then progressively polished it up to around 3,000 grit. I unfortunately had more video of the finished table that I lost, so you're just going to have to live with this crappy footage that I have remaining. Yeah, this was a really fun build to make, and I really did enjoy it. And the people at the Firehouse absolutely loved it.